This is a meeting of the Athens Board of Zoning Appeals. The meeting is called to order. At this time, it's 7 p.m. The date is January 12, 2007. Our board consists of 5 members and 2 alternates. The alternate takes full part in discussions of the board and becomes a voting member in the absence or conflict of interest of a regular member. Present this evening are members John Golsey, Greg Lavelle, Roger Gruser, and our alternate Hector Flores, and I am Muriel Frederick, the chair. Also present this evening are zoning administrator Steve Pearson, there he is, Paul Eschenbacher, our acting secretary, and Michael Miller from the City Law Director's office. The board operates according to the following procedure. The chair will name and describe the case. The zoning administrator will cite the specifics of the refusal of the case. The appellant or representative then will state the case for granting the appeal. Testimony next will be taken from those who support granting the appeal, then those who wish to speak in general comment, and those who support denial of the appeal. Following all testimonies, the board will receive concluding remarks from the appellant. Discussion from the floor then will be closed. The board will deliberate and render a decision. Under Athens City Code 230703B, the board has the power to grant such variances from the code as will not be contrary to the public interest, so that the spirit of the code shall be observed, public safety and welfare secured, and substantial justice done. Athens City Code Section 230910C requires that variances from the code shall not be granted unless the board makes specific findings of fact based directly on the evidence provided to it, that each and every one of the following 6 criteria are met. Practical difficulty or undue hardship. There must exist a practical difficulty or an undue hardship caused by exceptional conditions pertaining to the specific piece of property. Next, exceptional circumstances. There must exist exceptional circumstances or conditions applying to the property or its intended use that do not in general apply to properties in the same zoning district. Third is preservation of equal property rights. It must be determined that literal interpretation of the code would deprive the appellant of rights commonly enjoyed by others in the same vicinity, while granting the variance would not convey a special privilege. The fourth is minimum variance. It must be determined the variance is the minimum required to make reasonable use of the property. Number 5, absence of detriment. It must be determined that the granting of the variance will not be of substantial detriment to adjacent properties, nor will it materially impair the purposes of the code or the public interest. And last, not of a general nature, the variance sought must not be of a general or recurring nature, such the situation would more reasonably be handled by changing the law. The board, any person who's aggrieved by decision of the board may file an appeal to the Court of Common Pleas. Such petition must be filed within 30 days after the mailing of the board's resolution to the appellant. Tonight there are 2 cases on the agenda. There's number 0710V for 18 West State Street, which is zoned B3. John Valentour and Michael Smeltzer are the appellants, and 0702V for 38 North Court Street, which is zoned B2D, and John Valentour and Joe Kraus are the appellants. The board is required by law to take testimony under oath. Anyone wishing to speak, please stand to be sworn. Do you swear that the testimony you will give to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Okay, so our first case for 18 West State Street, Steve, could you tell us the reason it was refused?
My name is Steve Pearson. I'm the zoning administrator for the City of Athens, Ohio. Each of you should have received a packet prior to the meeting with all the information submitted for this particular appeal. This property is located at 18 West State Street. It's in the first block on the north side of State between Court and Congress. The best of my understanding, the building is currently occupied with where the use is all commercial. You should have a copy of a map showing the zoning district. It's in B3. It's in a B3 zoning district. A drawing indicating where residential use is proposed and where commercial use is proposed. And you should have The items or arguments in support of the variance. It's a requirement that each appellant has to provide a list of answers to questions that the code requires. The reason for the refusal is that several years ago, when the zoning code was amended, it prohibited, starting in the B2 zoning district, residential use on the ground floor. Actually, the ordinance says residential use is permitted on the second floor and above only. In this particular case, as illustrated, hopefully by the drawing that you have that was supplied by Mr. Valentor, there's just a small site plan that indicates the footprint of the building, 14 parking spaces next to the building, and then another larger drawing that shows residential use on the rear portion of the ground floor and commercial use on the front portion. So this is not a request to have residential right out on the street. It's the rear portion of the property. It's assumed right now that all uses, the parking requirements will be met by the 14 parking spaces. Parking requirements are, I believe it's one for every 300 square feet of floor area for commercial use and one for each resident in a residential use. So there is quite a bit of parking here, which is a little different situation than a lot of uptown properties have with on-site parking. And I suppose just again, the reason for the appeal is that residential use is not permitted on the ground floor or first floor. There's no differentiation between, is it the front part at the street level or is it the rear portion of a building? This is a single-story building right now.
Do you know what the reason for the restriction to second floor only would be? What is the
several years ago, I'd received calls at my office wanting to know what the ordinance was in Athens that prohibited residential use on the ground floor in commercial zones. Mm-hmm. And really the only thing at the time that prohibited that was parking. A lot of communities are concerned because of their downtowns essentially being left vacant, that previously highly prized ground floor commercial use was being abandoned to residential use, and that's not a good thing to have happen to your downtown area, your core area. But as growth occurs and sprawl occurs, a lot of times communities have their old downtowns essentially evacuated. And there is always then the potential to have residential use. But in business zones, the highest and best use obviously is commercial. But there's an understanding too that residential or mixed use, especially in downtown areas, keeps it vital. It keeps it moving. It keeps, things working all the time. So when the code was revised, what council did was they said residential's fine, but it has to be on the second floor and above.
And that's only part of the building's use, not the entire use of the
building. And as you look at especially in Athens, that's basically how everything has developed. There are a couple grandfathered ground floor uses uptown, but just two, and they're at the rear. They're not right on Court Street. Imagine walking Court or any other business zone and thinking how many residential uses there are right at ground floor. There are not very many. So I think this was just an attempt to recognize mixed use is not detrimental. It's a good thing to have going on, but it's just right at the ground floor where residential probably is it's not the best use of that prized commercial street frontage.
Street frontage. And what they're requesting, however, is not frontage, it's the back part of the building. So, and this building does not have a second floor that could be used for parking.
Right. It's just a single-story building.
It's an unusually long building too, which would make it rather awkward to utilize the whole thing for one purpose.
Yeah, if you look at the essentially the tax plat, the area of land involved, the building essentially runs that entire depth of the property. Building on one side, parking all along the side on the other. So this is an area right behind. It's the parking lot for the Christian church. It's there on the corner of Congress and State. The parking is all between the building and the church. That's right there on the corner. Right next door is S. Locker and Aremus Law Office, and then that stretch, I think they call it the Campbell Block, that has artifacts around Court Street. And then as you come back, Casa, Random House. Essentially that, I think it's called the Campbell Block.
Does anybody else have any other questions for Steve? Thank you.
All right, you're welcome.
All right.
Good evening, and thank you all for coming Friday night
Thank
to deal
you.
with this issue.
And will you state your name and address for the record, too? Your name and address for the record.
John Valentour, RVC Architects. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
I think that you've touched on a couple of the points that really we're trying to express here this evening in terms of the shape of the building and the shape of the lot are one of the reasons we're asking for consideration for this use. Now, I have brought, and I'm going to, I think, a little even more detailed drawings for you to look at. Mike and I have been working on plans for the development of the commercial space in front of the building, and I'd like you to take a look at that, as well as some photographs that I've taken of the property so that you're familiar with it. As Steve alluded to in his presentation also, the building is long and narrow. And I think we're going to have some people talk about the difficulties they've had in the past in terms of trying to fully utilize the space within this particular structure. Before Mike bought it, it was obviously Shostak's law office. And before that, it was Quick Printer. Quick Printer had very little need for public action or activities going on. They used the front portion of the building. I think it was a mail center and a quick printing operation. But I'd say 60 to 70% of the building was actually used for manufacturing, where they actually had the printing presses, and it wasn't really used for public access. And you can see from the plans there that we've developed, I think, 2/3 of that structure for commercial activity. And even at that, the length of the corridors that are necessary become difficult for multiple tenants to really have any kind of access inside that structure. The building is 28 feet wide and 115 feet long. If you look at some of the photographs, there's a little niche at the very back portion of it, which really helps or lends to creating sort of a small environment that could be used for a residential type access that would not, I don't think, interfere at all with the commercial primary use of this building. And I don't know if the photographs show it, but there's technically an alley right behind this property, and it abuts up to other residential uses. So the residential use is really not going to be stuck right in the middle of a major commercial area. It will actually abut across the alley to other residential uses that are behind Court Street, the rear of it. The apartment size we're asking is approximately 885 square feet. The business area would be 1,930 square feet, which makes the apartment approximately 30% of the actual area of the building. The designs that we've come up with so far, we're trying to make the structure work not as a linear feeling, but trying to make, when you walk into the business, to make it feel as comfortable and spacious as possible, which is a little bit difficult given the dimensions of this particular building. I'd like just to go through the findings as I see them, and I'll read my my letter that I wrote to the zoning board and my reasoning for this request. The granting of the variance will not be detrimental to public welfare. The residential use is permitted in this zone and would not constitute a modification in conflict with the public welfare. Use permitted in this zone, the residential use is an approved use by code. To the rear of the property are existing residential functions. The special circumstances this specific property relate to the shape of the existing structure, the long and narrow configuration, and the past occupancies of the building, printing operation, and I don't know what went beyond that, but I heard somebody say it was a grocery store at one time.
Wasn't the gas company in there for a while?
Was it?
Yeah.
The public access spaces have always been to the front portion of this building, and the rear was usually used for manufacturing, storage, or other activities that did not demand such public exposure. The length and width of the building limits the street front exposure, and then for the number of tenants that can benefit from this street front. Strict application of the code limits the allowable use of the first floor to commercial activities. This will limit the options of the current owner to occupy the rear section of the property. The service space or the rear space is rather large. The granting of this variance is necessary for reasonable use of the structure. Conversion of the rear section to residential will permit productive use of the structure and really help the economic value of the uptown area, in our opinion. The residential use does not require a public exposure, but will add to the vitality of the uptown district. The alterations proposed do not affect the quality of air or light to the adjoining properties. No extensions are proposed to the existing structure. We'll be working completely within the existing framework of the building. And special privileges will not be conferred on this property that are denied other buildings in the same zone. The structure will not change in its commercial exposure to West State Street. Parking is available on the property for the residential tenants as well as the commercial. This mixed-use proposal on the first floor will make the property function efficiently, in our opinion. The shape of the building and the depth of the lot are what created the special circumstance for this property. And allowing this variance will enable the uptown business district to prosper, in our opinion, even more. I'm going to turn it over to Mike, I believe, wants to say a few words.
Okay, I have one question
Okay.
About the, is there any kind of landscaping planning being done for this area?
Everything's
Not at
Everything
this
is
point in
paved.
time. The only
And is there anything required of you for landscaping? I suppose there's not,
question.
or there wouldn't be.
I proposed that in that little nook back there in the back to do something to provide a little bit of outdoor space for
I
the
would
residential
suggest that
tenants that would sort of be a private garden kind of
I
area.
would suggest that that might be a very good thing to do. Okay, just wanted to ask if that was anybody's plans. Thanks.
Anybody want to?
I'm the former owner of the building. I had my law practice in there for, I think, close to 8 years. And I agree with everything that John has said. I'm in favor of converting at least the back portion of it to residential. I had always had plans to do the same thing, but because I happened to be lucky and fortunate enough to get tenants for the entire building, I was able to support the building with my tenants. When I was there, I had 4 lawyers working for me, so we occupied 50% of the building. I had a lawyer, Joe Yanity, occupying 3 offices towards the back of the building, and the one remaining office was given over to a manager of a land development company in Athens at that time. The annex building, which is the area that we're talking about the offset is, was used sporadically by a lawyer from Logan, and then when he left after a year, it was used partially by an engineering consultant who had 1 office. The other office was vacant for a long time, and then the Democratic Party moved in most recently and was there for a year. When Joe Yanity retired in September of 2004, I was hopeful that I would be able to rent the front portion of the building out, and I had a great deal of difficulty finding someone to fill that space, and in fact, no one ever did take it over. My law firm downsized, and I was successful in getting Bill Biddlestone and one of his young associates to move in for a year. Had I not had that, I would have been rattling around in that building with just me and another lawyer, which would have made it very difficult to run the building. So I experienced over my 7 years there some difficulty renting the building for commercial use or business purposes only. John is absolutely right. John Valentor is absolutely right that the frontage of the building is what's important, because that's what the people on the sidewalk look at. They see the building there. Anything past those first two offices that you look into doesn't really matter. And so I don't see how converting the rest of the building to residential would have any impact on the business aspects of this B zone. So I think that even though they're not asking for quite that much for residential, what they're asking for does not in any way deter from the business aspects of the building. It also makes the property productive. The purpose of the zoning is to make properties productive, makes them keep their value. Converting it to this use would make that building economical, would make that building more viable. Any businesses uptown rely and require on having residents, people that are nearby, to use them. The bars need people to drink, alcohol. The restaurants need people to eat. The card shops and the artifact places need people to buy clothing. If you've got people living right nearby, obviously they're going to go to the closest places to get their stuff, whatever it is that they want to buy. And consequently, I don't see that there's an inconsistency with converting the rear part of the building to residential, because it provides full use of the property, simultaneously enhances the availability of purchasers and buying power in the downtown sections. In fact, at one time I had thought there might be some chance of putting a second story on the building and putting apartments up there, but my law practice took up all my time and I wasn't able to get into the development business. So anyhow, I think it's a great proposal. I think you should go for it. I think John's hit all the points that he needs to hit for all of you. Any questions for me? By the way, I'm not here as an advocate for, as a lawyer for either, John or Mr. Smeltzer. I'm here because I'm a former owner of the building and I'm fully aware of its history. By the way, prior to Bill Butt and Carol Butt owning the building and having a, not the quick printer, but something else, it was a printing shop and a card shop in the front with a satellite post office boxes and a card stock store. Before that, it was the gas company for many years. And before that, it was the A&P and not the Kroger. So Guy is wrong on that one. So anyhow, it's got a wonderful tin ceiling in part of it. There's a false ceiling in the building now. Above that is about 3 or 4 feet of a wonderful tin ceiling. It's a grand building, well built. All of the interior walls are non-supporting walls. I was informed by Mr. Valentor that there are beams across it, so the entire space down in the bottom could be taken out and reconfigured in any way that would be essential to keep the building and property viable. So, I don't see any reason for, any justifiable reason for keeping all the first floors commercial. That's senseless. What you want is storefront. You've got that here. Let's make the rest of it something useful for the new owner of the building.
Do you think with a creative idea and with a talented architect like John, this could be utilized for some commercial? When
the lawyers that rented from me moved out, I cast about to try to find compatible businesses that could use or rent space from me, so that I could fill the building, to get rent from the building to help pay for its maintenance. I had a lot of difficulty doing that. I couldn't find anyone that was willing to take over the entire building. At that time, a few years ago, 3 years ago, Themes was looking for a new space. Now, they finally found a place over on Court Street, but they were over by the sewer plant, if you'll remember, at one time. And they came over, but there was way too much space to use, and they needed a front entrance. So that deal fell through. I contacted a bunch of the business folks and lawyers in town to see if they would be willing to rent space from me. None of them were willing to rent space because they wanted to use the front entrance. I wanted to keep the front entrance for my law firm so that they wouldn't be competing with me for my business. So that didn't prove itself to work out very well. There were no other businesses that contacted me during the 3 years that made any sense. You have to remember, I had to have a business that's compatible with the law business. I couldn't have, a blacksmith would move in there because that wouldn't have worked out. I also scoured all of the newspapers for people who were looking for space. I contacted folks that I knew would be looking for space uptown, like some real estate agents that I knew. None of it panned out. The closest thing I ever came to was the IRS was looking for a building of about that size. They were looking for, I believe, 3,500 square feet. And they had 3 other options, and they elected to go with one of the other options, principally because of that unusual configuration of the building. So I think that the points raised here are legitimate points, and I think they warrant your very careful consideration. All right? Anybody else?
Anybody else?
I'm not that intimidating. Come on. I know Roger. Roger always has questions.
Sorry.
Hector? And I don't know this gentleman on the end, but
No, I have no questions. I know the building pretty well.
good. All right. Well, then you know what it's like. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to talk with all of you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak in favor?
I'll say a word or two. Bye, Mike.
Thank you.
Hello, Mike Smeltzer, 14300 Colville Ridge in Athens, also 18 West State Street. Thank you all for coming out on Friday night as well. Kind of a rainy night to be out. I think these guys kind of said, reiterated, my thoughts. I would like to say that I have done some extensive advertising, soliciting things that are compatible with my business, which are principally attorneys, CPAs, and mortgage loan origination. I'm a financial advisor. I do wealth management, so those would be some things that would be compatible. And I've not had a nibble. Nothing's been out there. I've been working with a property manager trying to fill that space as well. So I think that's pretty much all I can add, other than field any questions that you all might have for me.
Any more questions?
Okay,
Thank you.
thanks very much.
I don't see anyone here who looks as if he's going to, but is there anyone who would like to speak in opposition? Since you've just, we'll close the.
That neutral part, what was that?
The neutral part. Are you here to speak neutrally?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. In general comment, I believe.
General comments. Well, actually, I would have to probably say that I'm more for this. When I originally
You
saw
need
it,
to state your name.
I'm
and-
Guy Phillips, and small town, I own the property directly behind the building in question. Bob Shostak, who was just here before, rented office space in a building that I operated prior to him purchasing that building, and now he's back in another building that I operate. So I was very fortunate to find him as a tenant. As they were saying, finding office space tenants is definitely a challenge, but it's what's strong in Athens. That mixed use is what's extremely important to make it all very vibrant. When I first saw on the sheet that it was going to be residential on the first floor, I was very much opposed to that. That's an apartment complex. I would be very much against taking our downtown and putting first floor apartments on the front. It's what makes living on Court Street on the second floor is fun and exciting, is all the retail and commercial establishments on the first floor. However, finding out that it's just a small percentage, a third or less than a third of the building being used, I'm very supportive of that. And I will be here in the next few days asking for the same variance, because I have the space of commercial use that would have the very similar characteristics: long, deep building, back is not being well utilized,
Lots of parking.
commercial space, it's vacant right now. I could have that housing so fast. So I'm very supportive of this.
But that would be a different case, a different day.
It will be a different case, a different day, but very similar circumstances. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else here who's wishing to speak, either in for or against or in general comment? All right, then the comments from the floor are closed. And
I have a question for Steve.
Steve, could you come on back up there?
Are there any other places on this same street that they are residents in the first floor? Or is this the first case? Are there any other examples of any other property that they have residential use on the first floor?
In the north block of Court Street,
Or
there
any part of
is,
Court Street?
on Court Street, I'm only aware of 2 first floor residential uses. One is called 27 and a half North Court. 27 North Court has a subway and some other things in the bottom, apartments above. There is a block building behind it off the alley that you can't see from Court Street that it's a 2-story building, and it has residential use first and second floor. It's not right out on the street. So that would be an example of a legal nonconforming use, a grandfathered use from when the code changed.
It's ground floor, but it also is not street front.
Correct.
That was grandfathered in.
Right. And then you have, the only other place that I'm aware of is behind H&R Block. There are some apartments behind H&R Block, but the entrance is off of another alley. The entrance is not from Court Street, although I believe you can go in the front, possibly get back there. But the main entrance to the residential use is off the alley in the back, so it's not right on Court Street. So that's an example of 27 and a half is in the B2D district where the same restriction applies. And the other one is in this same block in the B3 district. And those are the only ones that I'm aware of where we have any kind of residential use on the first floor. Neither one of those at street front.
It's
Where's that?
The one that my partner's
Oh, yeah, that is another one. What has been in the front, yeah, it's at the corner of Fern and Court Street, same zone, and there is residential use behind on the first floor. It's not up the street front. Public Defender, I'm not sure who's in there now. It's Public Defender is still in there at street front.
Was that also grandfathered? Was that from the Sherwin-Williams days that there was accommodate a house back behind the
No,
building?
this construction occurred prior to this new regulation.
If I'm not mistaken, you have to go all the way around in the back to get into that apartment.
Right. You have to go down Fern Alley essentially in order to park and to access the residential. So it's not right at street front either.
Really, but its address is Court Street other than Fern Alley?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Were there 2 variances that you had mentioned to me that were done for properties similar to mine, or is that the ones you're talking about there?
No, those were uses that were there prior to the change in the code. The board has recently heard, I believe, 2 cases. One was the old, where there was a dry cleaners down on Richland Avenue, and the owner wanted to put in an ADA compliant apartment. It's way back off Richland Avenue, a lot of parking in the front. That was one case the board had heard. The other was off East State Street on one of the side streets where the B3 zone, if you didn't know it, you would think you were going back in a residential zone, but the B3 district goes back in. It used to be a plumbing shop. It's been several shops. And at one time, the person who actually ran the shop lived in an apartment right next door. It was a single-story building. That was at street front, but on a residential street. So those are the 2 cases I believe the board has heard most recently requesting variance. And as I recall, both those were granted because the use wasn't right at the street.
Anybody else for Steve? Thank you. No, I think we're closed from the floor. And are we ready to make a proposal, or do we want to have further discussion first?
I just had a comment that,
Okay.
this might be just the beginning of some more cases coming up.
Well, we know it is now.
Well,
The others were the beginnings, the other two were the beginning.
Yeah, and
They would have sat on
because
both of those.
the residential probably would be more profitable downtown than just a lot of commercial uses, so I just want to make that clear.
Okay. Anybody have any comment about that? Having, it is a permitted use in the area. It's not that it's not a permitted use. The idea is not that you are to restrict people from having rental units as part of their building, but that you are, it supposedly is to be restricted to second floor uses. Or basically, it sounds to me, my interpretation was the primary thrust of the code was to have it not be street front uses.
To make
Or-
certain that street fronts are being utilized
Street
for
fronts are
business
being used for
purposes.
business purposes, and that the business be a commercial type of use, not a
Sure.
residential one. But, yeah, as you pointed out, each case is separate,
Yeah.
not to worry.
I'm just curious, if I buy the place, I want to live myself in it, would that be any restriction? Do I have to be going and get a variance if the owners is occupying the place?
Residential is residential,
Okay.
so it wouldn't matter if it was unoccupied.
Yeah. Okay, well, would somebody like to make the proposal for the, anybody who wants to phrase this? I don't generally do, but would you like to?
I move we grant a variance in case number 07-01V, Zone B3, 18 West State Street. John Valentor and Michael Smeltzer are the appellants. The appellant is requesting a variance from section 230405A I to permit residential use on the ground first floor of a structure where residential use is only permitted on the second story floor and above.
Is there anything that you want to add to that?
Nothing I can think of.
Okay. Anybody want to second the motion?
So moved.
All right. Well then, what would be the practical difficulty or undue hardship? Do you agree with the presentation that the,
Unusual shape of the building.
yeah. Has anybody, did anyone have a chance to go, you say you're familiar with the building already. Did anybody else have a chance to see the building and be
I'm
familiar with it?
extremely familiar with
You're
the
very familiar
building.
with it. Well, I had not been aware, I've been in there, but I've not been aware how incredibly long it is.
You stand at that
It's like
front
you go
door.
on, you go on forever, and you think you're at the end of the building, and you open a door, and then you go through some even more of it. And it is very narrow in feeling, well, not just in feeling, it actually is very
Yes.
narrow. It's a real shotgun kind of a structure. So I would say to make that work, the entire thing work as offices, could be done, but it would be difficult. So, and obviously, we've had testimony that there has been some difficulty in filling it. So, the shape of the building. Exceptional circumstances. What's exceptional about the circumstance of this building? Yeah. I haven't seen, I've never been into another one like it in Athens, where I got that same feeling that, you're just shooting down this arrow. All right. Property rights would, interpreting the code literally, deprive the appellant of rights commonly enjoyed by others in the same vicinity.
Others don't have that issue. So I guess it wouldn't.
Well, you have to think in terms of too, that, let's think of every tenant on that street, once we say, if we grant the variance, they would all decide financially, it would be much better to turn all of our properties on this block to residential. We'll keep a little
You
500.
think
no,
all
no.
those properties lend themselves to that arrangement?
Not all properties would lend themselves to the arrangement, but this one, this one lends
You
itself to.
could.
Well, no, you couldn't, because there wouldn't be any basis on which to grant a variance for a street front use of residential. There needs to be some argument that there is something exceptional about the circumstance, and most of the buildings, it wouldn't be an except, none of this would apply. This building has the advantage, because of its structure, long and narrow the way it is, of having an enormous amount of parking.
Convenient parking
It's
space.
extremely convenient parking. Most of the buildings in downtown Athens would not have that, so that wouldn't apply. I think there are very few properties which would be appropriate to be used for mixed use on the same floor. Most of them, the mixed use is expected to be on the second floor. This building does not have a second floor. Instead, it has an enormously great, deep structure.
That's the way the building is, and he's requiring special privilege. There's a couple buildings around that you have businesses up front, and they're deep in back.
Yeah, see, I'm not
And
familiar with all
they
that.
could just put a wall there and say, hey, we want the
Let's
same
make more
thing
money.
that this one is.
And do they
If that
have,
made sense, then if they came and talked to us, we'd probably let them do it.
and would they have the equivalent amount of parking that would make it possible to have a residential
Well,
use?
there's always different ways of getting different kinds of parking, as we know. As
Not,
Not
well,
like
would they
this.
have this kind of
Not
parking?
like this.
No, I don't think
No,
they would have
It's
this
that
kind
kind
of
of parking that makes this a very valuable commercial.
No, apparently it
Enterprise
has
as
not
opposed
made
to
it a
resident.
valuable commercial use. For the average attorney's office, you don't need 14 parking places, even if you had every one of these filled with an office that was doing that kind of a business. You make an appointment, you go in, you see your attorney, you go back out again. It's one car. It's not going to. This is a grocery store parking lot. It'd be a fabulous grocery store. It's too bad that there's not a grocery store that wants to come uptown Athens.
This is the primary area, but if you took these walls out and you put in windows and you put in an exit door, it could be another area for something else.
The problem with that I was thinking about as he was talking about filling it is that for the people who want that kind of ground floor walk-in office, they want to be on the
It
street.
doesn't necessarily have to be an office. It could be clothing store, it could be restaurant, it could be anything.
I wouldn't want to do a clothing store way back there because no one would see have you done a retail business? No one's going to be
Yeah,
able to
I've done
see.
retail business, but I also know retail here in Athens, once you get the word out there, people be running over there.
I wouldn't want to do a retail business with uptown Athens prices on an off of the parking lot
Let
location
retail up
like
here
that.
Move that back to offices.
I wouldn't want to run any
Well,
kind of
maybe we can
retail
move on to
business
the next
there.
one.
But anyway, you might.
Yeah.
I wouldn't pay the rents for it. Okay,
Next item.
I think that's got that one pretty well talked about. Okay, the minimum variance. Would the variance be the minimum required to make reasonable use of the property? And to me, it seems minimal because all they're
Well, we
asking
are trying
for
to
is,
change the entire the purpose of the building. That's
well, that's what's being,
not minimal.
What was
no,
the purpose of the building?
Commercial use. Commercial use.
they're not changing the entire purpose of the building.
Well, it's a residential. You
No,
know,
they're
this is a
requesting
major.
they're requesting that a percentage of the building, probably less than the percentage if this was on 2 floors instead of one great big
If
lawn.
this was a residential to begin with, then we could argue whether 20 people or 5 people or 10 people, that would be minimum variance.
It's not the number
But-
of people they're asking about here. They're asking
I know,
to
I know.
use it as
For
a
a total
residence at
different
the back
use,
of the
right.
building. And the number of people that they're requesting is, I'd say, not a problem because of the extensive parking that they have. But it seems to me minimal use because it's only a part of the use of the building, not the entire building. And that it is not going to change the front of the building, the frontage use at all.
Right now.
Yeah.
they
No,
can-
well,
they can
they
come
can't
back and
do
add more
it.
on it.
We,
6
oh,
months
that's
from
what
now,
we
now
would
we
need to
wanna
say, in
double that.
substantial conformance with the plans
Residential
as,
space.
That would be the case.
I think we need to modify it, in substantial conformance.
So they can
With the
just
plans
leave
as-
this and make all this
That's
No, no, no,
residential.
not if we set it up the way they've requested it. They can only do what they've requested. And what they've requested
For now.
is No, they
they
cannot
can
do it
come back
unless
to
they
the
come back
board.
for another
Right.
variance.
And so we say, stop here, I'm making more money over here, let's get another variance. Because
And-
you're-
And you think they're gonna get it?
Don't-
Well,
That's
I don't
not-
know,
that's-
like you
that's not
can't,
our
so once
problem.
you start it, it's gonna keep growing.
They cannot, what your concern is that they would do something different than what we give them permission for.
Several
They cannot do,
buildings in town, as you said before, it goes here, they can keep that there and make all of that residential.
they cannot do that unless they get permission.
Yeah, but there's also the city legislators are supposed to come up with this comprehensive plan, but they've failed to do that, so it's pushing it back on the appeals board.
That's not what's being requested
I
right now. It's
understand.
not what's
I'm
under
just taking
discussion
one
right
step
now. What's
further.
under discussion right now is the plan is submitted. The plan is submitted is what they would get permission for. They would not be permitted to do anything else excepting what they have been granted the variance for. Being granted a variance to do this does not give them a variance to go later on and make other changes to the plans. Anything they need to do, they need to go to Steve's office and get permission for it. He'll say, nope, you can't do it. And then they would have to come and get another variance.
Well, I guess what we're just saying is we don't feel that it's a minimum variance. That's all.
Okay.
Simple as that.
All right. I consider that it's minimal because it's
I
only
do
requesting,
also.
it's requesting only the back, less than a third of the building. And that's the only thing that they're requesting. They're not requesting
Okay,
anything
okay.
else. So we go on to that
Absence
one.
of detriment.
There is a, and then absence of detriment,
Now, there is a
would granting the variance be of any detriment to the?
There is a
city?
detriment to those people who want to use that area as a commercially only, and they will be deprived of having that. You know, they want the next door to them to be also a commercially business that people can, because they're walking down the street, you go one to the next one to the next one, and so on. That would be a detriment to those people.
Those people would go from the next one to the next one, and the next one, and that's exactly what they would get because it is street frontage.
Yeah, I know, but it's,
It is street frontage.
Correct.
And the people who would be, you're saying that the people who would have, it would be a detriment to would be this,
yeah,
to the
if
passersby?
I had a business, if I want all my neighbors to have be involved in the commercial business and the residentials moving in the neighborhood, that would be a detriment to me.
Well, it's too bad that the neighbors aren't in here complaining that it's gonna be a detriment.
Well, it's not
And
just the
yet the
neighbors, it's not the
businesses,
immediate
and where
neighbors.
would the businesses are going to be getting business from where?
They're not going to get business from these people who are going to be living there only, you know, I mean, they're not going to be.
But they are people who would be doing
But
business
they're
with the
occupying a
business
space
owners in
that,
town.
they're occupying a space that could have been used by commercial, that would add to the nature of this commercial zone
Did you
of the
hear the
downtown.
testimony from two people here tonight that they were not exactly having their doors knocked down by people trying to?
No, but
Well,
let's
you
see.
rent the space.
I mean, if they could rent it, that'd be the easiest way to go. Why go to all the trouble of hiring an architect, going to all this effort, if they don't feel like it's justified?
Well, you know, I'm
The
sure,
simplest thing is rent it to offices.
The
I'm
easiest
sure
thing
if I
to
took to
do.
Mr. Volunteer and said, develop this for a commercial purpose, he would be able to do it, yes or no?
Do something to improve the property. Currently, the property is available and has been being used. There are offices here, and there are, it was usable. It's just difficult to find a tenant because it's not desirable. It's less desirable as office space, and that's why they're wanting to do something else with it. That's, okay, that's it. Then, on the, not of a general nature, how many other, is this a general or recurring nature that the situation would more reasonably be handled by changing the law?
Well, the law is clear on the zoning part.
Would it be, is this something that the law should be changed to handle?
No, because
no.
it doesn't occur.
It doesn't, no, so it's not
Hopefully
of a
won't.
general nature then, okay. So
Yeah, it's not.
we've agreed that it's not of a general nature, that's good, we've got something we agree on. Okay, do we have anything further that we want to discuss? Oh, I do think that it would be important to amend, and I don't want to go back through all the discussion, so we're going to do this a little bit backwardly, but we want to have the motion, have the addendum that it be in substantial conformance with the plans as submitted, so that it's exactly the way it is here, as far as the ratio of space would be maintained. Okay. Okay, well,
Let me just double check something, meaning that they could not do any more apartments or anything. It's
No.
exactly right there.
Right.
And
They
That's
couldn't do,
it.
they couldn't do anything more than
Just
that.
can't move any of those walls a foot.
Oh, they could come back in.
No. it's
I'm
closed.
afraid that, yeah,
Yes, it's
normally,
You had
I
your
think
chance.
you've said everything. It's pretty well covered.
So,
Yeah. Okay, no, this exactly the way it is the way it would have to be. They wouldn't be able to do anything different unless they got permission again. Okay, so then, anything else? Are we ready to vote then?
Yes, let's go.
All right, let's start at this end then, Roger.
Yes.
Okay. You're next. You're next.
pass over me, give me a minute.
Oh, okay.
You want to be passed going this way?
We can, we're just passing
I
by.
vote no.
I would know.
Okay,
I vote yes.
and I vote yes. So you've received your variance, and you'll get notice of it within the mail, through the mail within the week. And good luck with it. Thank you all very much. You're welcome. Okay, the next one. Steve, do you want these in the file, or can we keep these then? Okay.
Yep.
And here are the photographs too. Okay, our next one.
Heated discussions.
Lively. I wonder if you can lose any weight doing that. I would like to think you could. That's it, and here's your file. Thank you. All right, our next court case is 0702V. It's for 38 North Court Street. And this one is, when Steve's ready, he'll give us the specifics of the refusal. They're looking for a variance for off-street parking requirements.
Again, my name's Steve Pearson. I'm a zoning administrator for the city. The board has recently heard a proposal for this same particular property. In that case, there was a lease on the property. And I believe in this case, Mr. Kraus wants to be the owner, wants to purchase the property.
So he's not the owner at this point?
No, he's not now the owner. In the packet of information that you were provided, this is essentially just kind of a modification of the map from the last case. The last time you heard a case on this particular property. The difference being, though, that you can see that there's a, for lack of a better term, a leg on this property. I don't know if you'd noticed it before, that goes out to Mill Street. It has a Court Street address, excuse me, but it's kind of like a wraparound lot. Off the Mill Street side, if you look through the rest of your packet, there's some parking indicated, and that is off of Mill Street. Court Street is in this drawing up here. Mill Street's on this side. There is commercial use right here. This is essentially across the street from the BP station, and there's a little area that's cut back in where you can park 6 cars.
Is
There is-
that the place right by the beer garden?
Right in front of that then?
Yeah, the area that you see here that's kind of a U-shaped, fat U-shaped area at the rear of the building is a patio that I believe is used by the Pigskin, who's also one of the Court Street front tenants.
And so the parking goes right up to that sort of little doorway.
Right. Yeah, it's a small,
This is the beer garden here.
Yeah. And is the parking over
Parking
there?
comes in
It comes
here.
in, that's the door that goes into the beer garden? There is a sort of a step up and a little,
This is a fence here, and right there is the door to
pull in off.
Yeah, and it all stacked parking. Yeah.
The area that's indicated on the drawing as to be used for parking is being used as parking right now.
And it's currently being, yeah,
Right.
that's that. There's a little door there. There's a little gate kind of thing there.
He said that was a bad shot.
Okay. Well, the pictures are helpful. Thank you.
There are 3 variances that are necessary. The proposal is for residential use on the second floor, so that's not one of the variances. It's all second floor residential use. The request is for 9 total occupants on the second floor, and that would require 9 parking spots. This property is a little different than the previous case because it's located in the B2D district. In that downtown district, all your commercial parking requirements are met by the city parking garage. So there are no commercial parking requirements. Those 6 spaces then technically can all be used to meet some residential use. So there's not a variance for residential use at all, or no necessity for commercial parking. 9 tenants need 9 parking spots, and there are only 6, so that's the first variance. Second variance is that all spaces have to be provided adequate ingress and egress. In other words, every car has to be able to move without moving another car. So that's essentially the second variance, commonly called stacked parking. This has to do with ingress, egress, accessibility. So even though you have 6 spaces, three cars have to move for the other 3 to be able to move. The third variance is for the smallest of the parking spaces. Parking spaces have to be at least 180 square feet in area. That particular space is only 150 square feet in area. The parking spaces are all indicated as 10 feet wide. 9 is the minimum. So there's no way to make additional parking long ways, perpendicular off the street. So that's the third variance.
If you took the beer hall out, you could.
No, because
You'd
have to ramp up to it. It's raised.
If that deck in the back was removed, you would still need variance for stacked parking, and possibly too for area parking. Mr. Valentour may be able to give a little better information on. So I'm looking at the drawing. I'm seeing this U-shaped area. I believe that's like a deck, but that might be structure actually sticking out right there on the back, which would preclude space 1 from being extended to create another parking space. If the deck was gone, you might be able to add 2 more, possibly.
But you couldn't get 9 in any case.
No, you couldn't get 9. You'd still need a variance for stacking, and I have to look at it a little closer, but you may need some area, maybe not, for the 180 square feet as opposed to 150. Looks like potentially you could come up with 8 parking spaces instead of 9. That'd still need a variance. You'd still need a stacking variance. You may not need an area variance on spot number 6.
Oh, this was before the board earlier, but I didn't go find the case. How did it resolve?
The board granted the variance 5-0 for lease parking at the secure parking lot to Mr. Phillips, and he was going to lease the building. It was contingent upon him always having control of, by lease or ownership, the particular building, this building under lease, and secure parking lot under ownership.
So we gave a variance on this
Yes, we have.
earlier?
Right. Yeah.
Based on.
So why, how can we?
And
deal
that
with
was
this
for, Mr. Phillip?
It was for leased parking.
Right. It was for 9 lease
9
parking
lease
spaces, off-site, not in same ownership. So this is a same property, different proposal.
So basically, currently, it's required to provide 9 parking places, and what they're requesting is to provide only 6, and 3 of them, and 3 of them being stacked. So essentially, they, instead of 9 accessible parking places, they want 3 accessible and 3 non-accessible, and then for 3 tenants to have no parking. That's the current request?
I'm not sure if there's any proposal for alternative parking for the other 3 tenants or not.
Okay, I didn't see that
The
either, but we'll
only
find
thing
out.
we're dealing with is what's there on that lot.
Okay,
That's why this proposal is different than the other one. It also had a component of use for parking on a lot that was not the same lot. It was adjacent, but it wasn't the same lot.
okay, and according to the letter, yes, it is going to provide other parking in addition to these places. Okay.
Any other questions?
Anybody else?
Do you know if Mr. Phillips has come to you and said that he's no longer in the running and he has no lease on this property, has no interest in this property anymore? And we don't have to deal with the variance that already is with this?
I've not spoken to Mr. Phillips about it, but you could ask him since he's here tonight.
Okay.
I've not spoken with him about it. Variances that are granted are good for 1 year. You have to essentially cash them in or turn them into some use within 1 year. 1 year goes by, they expire. And then once you take your variance, turn it into an application for, say, a building permit or remodeling permit, you have to start within 1 year, finish within 2 years. So essentially, variances at their extreme have a 3-year lifespan. And that's a recent change in the code, too. It used to be when variances were granted, they had no expiration date. People would come back in and say, Grandpa got this variance in 1968, and I'm here to cash it in 2007. So that's one of the reasons the code was changed, too. So these things don't have life in perpetuity and cause problems, because the code might change. Things can change. The conditions under which the variance was granted originally may not be the same. And the 1 year essentially then locks you in to make sure that any change in the code that could happen, you were subject to the older regulations, and you have a reasonable amount of time to initiate the variance.
All right, I don't have any further questions. Does anybody else?
Okay, thank you.
Hello again, John Valentor, RBC Architects. And, to your question, I assume that there's deals trying to be made or that haven't happened in terms of what's the status of this piece of property. And that's why we're here again with another option to try and work out some kind of negotiation with the owner. That's all I can assume. But first of all, I'd like to add another, again, we're at this point, with Mr. Kraus, we're asking for the potential of adding a couple more pieces or parking spots to this piece of property. I think I did show you by the photographs there that there is legally 3 parking spots on the site. Removing the bar extension at the rear is probably not the best option. But we have another plan. And this would also, I don't know, I guess it wasn't officially, according to Steve, requested in terms of its variance, but Mr. Kraus also owns a piece of property on 187 North Lancaster. And there is available parking at that site. And I want to just show you the photographs of that lot. This is, again, it doesn't meet the requirements of code because it's more than 500 feet from the building. It's right across the street from the welfare department. Recently, a driveway has been built to the rear of the property. The unit has 6 tenants, and there are 6 parking spots available off of North Lancaster
This is the back
Street.
of the house. The street's up there. Like I said, it's across the street from the
The driveway was constructed in
Isn't those parking spaces for them?
I'm sorry.
Isn't this parking spaces for the residents
No,
of the
they're all, and I went to the code office. Steve wasn't there, but I asked the code officials. That's brand new. That was just placed there recently. And I think it was done.
Excuse me, this wasn't checked out to Steve, but
His people, I went down and talked, he wasn't there, but I talked with his code enforcement officers to find out where the 6 parking spots were that satisfy the requirements for 187 North Lancaster. And if you look at the front of the building, and I went over it with their code officials, those 6 spots are in the front of the building. There's a 2-car garage and 2 parking spots on either side of that entry. If you look at the site plan for that piece of property, it's extremely wide at North Lancaster Street. This driveway was actually built in conjunction with Dan Abdella, who owns the adjacent property, so that he could gain access to the rear for additional parking on his land. But as far as we know at this point in time, and these things need to be verified, there is ample room at this site for remote parking that would be under the same ownership.
But we can make a decision based on what it would be approved or not. We need to know something more concrete before we can make a decision.
Well, I think that what I'm asking, I don't have surveys exactly done at this point in time, but if the concept is acceptable, and if we can work with the code office in terms of determining the legal parking requirements of that particular site in conjunction with the on-site parking, that whatever number is derived at would be acceptable to the code office, and we could work with that then. Say that there was 8 potential total spots available. That's what we would work with in terms of development of the second floor.
But we go back to our point man, Steve. Has he been appraised of this? Have you two talked about it?
He wasn't in the office the day I went down and discussed this with his code officials.
What day was it? Did you turn around later on and talk to him after he talked with his code officials?
I think that even in my letter, I discussed leased parking would be available on adjacent property, or not adjacent, but property under same ownership. Leased or whatever form would be required by the board of relationship to this property for parking to the uptown parking.
But as you're aware, that we take, Steve's our point man, and
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Steve, are you aware of this new proposal? That he just, all right,
Well,
it's your call.
I'm just indicating that there is parking available there. How much, I'm not sure. If it's 3 spaces, 2 spaces.
Yeah. We can do.
What I'm asking for is the ability to work with that remote parking from your standpoint. We're not asking for a specific number of people that can be occupying the second floor of this as residential.
Well, I'm probably out of place, and you might want to ask for an extension and work with our point man, Steve, and then come back with a different proposal. I mean,
To me, to have remote parking, this does not look like an improvement over what had been granted before.
Well, but that can't count.
That can't count, but
Because if that deal doesn't work,
I understand. But the reason it was granted was because it seemed like a pretty good option.
Right.
And
Well,
this one is not looking like a really good
well,
option.
for some reason, though, that maybe, I don't know, and, well, he's not here now. That option is no longer on the table.
Yeah.
well, we don't
Well,
know
you said you
that.
didn't know that for sure.
Well,
Your client doesn't own the building yet, does he?
I think Mr. Kraus would know it because he's the one that's putting together the next package.
Right,
But
well,
he doesn't own the building yet.
I don't know what the status is in terms of the sale of the
When
property.
we're all through with what you have.
I'm sorry.
to say- When we're all finished with what you have to say, then I'm sure that he'll
Okay.
have a few
Well,
things to
that's
add.
what-
And you have a question?
a statement. I mean, if Steve's not aware of this new proposal, it's his choice to go forward, but I would recommend that he table it until they come up with a concrete
So they know what they're,
And-
it's
Well, he
difficult.
wants to know what our opinion would be.
No,
in case
Yeah, once you get voted down on a variance, you have to wait a whole year before you can come back unless there's some
Right.
substantial
Well,
change.
I understand if you have some
So-
concerns about this. I
Are they-
tried to get hold of Dan Abdallah. He's out of town for the rest of the month.
It might
And-
be a good
by putting a
idea.
new proposal on the table without having Steve check this to tell us, are there's enough parking space for this? Is it enough in walking distance? What are you asking for?
Okay.
I just feel
Okay, I
confused.
mean, I
don't know
understand.
about the rest of you. So I would personally, I don't know about the rest of the board, I would say you might want to table this, work it out, come back with facts and numbers. Are we
Okay.
willing? Well, we're here.
I mean, we can hear it as you say, you're playing to your best
Muriel,
options.
when was the date of the last hearing? in
I
this
don't
case?
remember when it was. Steve, what was,
It was
could you
2 months
remember to
ago.
tell us? It wasn't that long ago.
Well, 2 months
2
ago.
months.
If
only
it's 2
2
months
months
ago,
ago?
can we be hearing the same case again?
No, it's a different case.
Different
This
case.
is a new
different
Well,
case.
case.
it is.
It's a new
it is
case, new
different-
person.
there's enough
It's the
changes.
same building,
Am I
it's
wrong?
the same residence.
But
It's
are
a
there
new-
enough
it's a new
changes
case.
for us to consider another?
It's a totally different parking situation. The parking was.
I'm sorry, the question is,
Well, his question is, can we be hearing the same case in less than a year? Well, it's not the same case. It's a new case that we're hearing. Am I
right, as a matter of
correct?
fact, you can hear the same case by the same appellant if there's a substantial
Substantial
change.
change. Okay.
So in this
And this
case,
is a-
there is
yeah.
a new appellant, there is a new parking scenario, there is different options with ownership and leasing. My opinion would be
It's the whole thing. The building's the
it's
same.
significant enough difference that even Mr. Phillips could have come in and asked
Yeah.
for the same thing.
So yes, we can. Now, would it be better if we didn't, is the next question, considering that there are things that are brand new that weren't part of the information you had when you advertised this,
I think what everyone needs to understand is the refusal is based on the information submitted.
right?
Right.
There was no proposal for remote parking with a refusal, therefore there was no consideration. Now, it is mentioned in the arguments that have come up, but for example, I didn't advertise for lease parking in same ownership greater than 500 feet away. That'd be another variance that would be necessary. So my refusal is based on the information I received on the date the refusal occurred, not on some proposal that happened just a couple days ago that I didn't know anything about until this evening.
Right.
I would have to verify first that the parking, wherever this parking is, I'm not sure where the location is, that it's in a zone where parking lots are permitted first. Then I have to check to see how many residents are at that particular property or the total parking required for all uses on that property to determine if there's excess parking, and that could be possibly deed restricted or leased at some other location. I also have to check accessibility. You may have X number of parking spaces, but only if you have, there's a difference between 16 cars, 4 behind 4 behind 4 behind 4, than there is 16 cars that can all move at the same time. And this is all information I have not had an opportunity to review. Yeah, as a matter of fact, when I receive applications, I have up to 30 days to make a decision because sometimes it can get rather involved, and there are quite a few different things that have to be checked out.
Okay. Well, then I would suggest that under the circumstances, it might be better to
Can I ask
hear
for a
this next
continuance,
month.
please? Can I ask for a continuance?
Yes, you may, and I think you'll be granted. I was going to recommend that you ask for a continuance.
Thank you very much.
Okay, and so we'll listen to this. We'll hear this. Can we hear it next month? Then would it be possible to get it on the agenda next month? Or okay, all right. Then
If I could too, code officers are not zoning administrators. There are 2 zoning administrators in the city of Athens. I'm one, and the Service Safety Director, Ray Hazlett, is the other. So none of my officers told me that the discussion occurred, and neither do they have the ability to act on my behalf. They've not been appointed.
so they can't.
As zoning
so,
administrators.
Yeah, so this is
And I have no idea what questions they were asked or
Yeah.
what the circumstances were. And I can tell you too that none of them mentioned to me that the conversation occurred. Paul's here tonight. He didn't knowing
Well,
about
for them, it
so.
would have been simply a conversation.
And that's not
So-
that's a great problem. It's just that I'm the only one, or Mr. Hazlett
Right.
is the only one who can officially make a determination, approved, refused, what the circumstances are.
Okay, well, I think that this will be well heard next month, and appreciate your help with it. And now the only thing we have left that we have to do is to approve the minutes from last month.
Reviewed the minutes, and I think they're all in order.
Has everyone else had a chance to
Yeah, it's
review
okay.
them?
I
Do we
think
all
okay.
agree that
Yes.
then the
I move to
minutes
accept
will
the
be
minutes.
accepted? Okay, and then we're adjourned.
Good.
We thought of something else.
Emailed and ground mailed the minutes of the last meeting.
Yes,
So you need to act on those if
we just did.
We just did.
Oh, I'm sorry. The only other thing I'd like to bring up is always January 31st, terms expire. There are alternating
Oh, I'm
terms.
sorry, I forgot.
I checked with the mayor's office today, and I know it seems that Mr. Gruser's term is always the one expiring. But the
Don't
list
use
that
that
I,
word with expire.
Renewing.
Mr. Gruser has indicated to me that he would like to continue as a member, and I'll get that information to the mayor.
The other expiring term?
The other expiring term was Mr. Shaffey, who
Oh, well, but,
told me a couple months ago that he was moving to California, was resigning from the board, and I told him that he should make that known to the mayor.
so if Mr.
but I don't-
Shaffey's term has expired, perhaps he used that as his resignation. So we're looking for
It has the same effect, I
a
guess.
new member of the Board of Zoning Appeals. And, yeah, this is the plea. If you're interested at all in helping us out on the Board of Zoning Appeals, doing your duty to the city of Athens, please join us.
As an
You need to contact the mayor's office and volunteer. Thank you. All right, now then, we're done with that. Then we are adjourned.